staying on the subject of this wild interview that Donald Trump did with Megyn Kelly that repeatedly went off the rails, another moment that just baffles me time and time again in these interviews, Jesiah, is, and I have an example of it here for you from this interview, but he's been doing it often where he'll incriminate himself further. And I saw someone saying before these interviews, the interviewers need to give him the Miranda warning because he always says things that are so incriminating, such as, hey, did you do this thing you're accused of, this thing that would be crimes? And he'll go, I have the right to do whatever the heck I want, which in my long legal career that I don't have, my knowledge as a non-lawyer, not the best defense to just say, oh yeah, you're accusing me of that? I did it, but I can do it because I'm the former president.
Yeah. I'm also not an attorney, but I have watched quite a bit of TV in my day, and I've seen many legal dramas, Law and Order, Boston Legal, The Practice, whatever. And I've never seen, I feel like if a defendant made that legal strategy, the episodes would be like 5 minutes long instead of 45 minutes. But then it's also hilarious to think somebody standing by before every interview, like you said, and reading Donald Trump's Miranda rights. Can you imagine? Listen, I know Mirandas. I've met so many Mirandas. You don't need to tell me anything. But somebody should do it. I guarantee you, Trump's attorneys probably want some, like, Mr. President, you
anything
really
you
don't
say,
need to say
canon
that.
will be used against you. Did you rob this bank? I did, and I have the right to because of the Presidential Records Act. Okay.
He would. I feel like he would actually. That should be a
Let
meme.
me show
I
this
feel
clip. We're talking all about the clip. I got to show it first. Here it is, everybody.
We have a deranged guy named Jack Smith who's been overturned at the Supreme Court a number of times, and he gets overturned. You know why he gets overturned? Because he goes too far. They don't even mention the Presidential Records Act. This is all about the Presidential Records Act. I'm allowed to have these documents. I'm allowed to take these documents, classified or not classified. And frankly, when I have them, they become unclassified. People think you have to go through a ritual. You don't. At least in my opinion, you don't.
Well, good. If in your opinion it's okay to rob banks, then you're good. Why are you even here? Leave the trial.
He really does think the PRA, the Presidential Records Act, is just like a blank check. He really thinks that.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
just for, again, as a reminder to the audience, the Presidential Records Act is not a blank check for a former officer of the United States, even a former president, to take national defense information or classified documents and keep them when the National Archives and the FBI request them back. The Presidential Records Act covers things of a personal nature. So if President Trump, when he was president, had like a diary, I cannot even imagine, by the way, what that would read like, but let's just assume that he had a diary. Well, yes, then of course he can have copies of it and take it with him for his memoirs or whatever. We've seen previous presidents do that. That's the purpose of the Presidential Records Act. But the documents that Donald Trump had at Mar-a-Lago, that he kept for about 2 years when the National Archives and the FBI were trying to get them back, those belong to we the people. And the National Archives are the custodians of those documents. He did not have a right to keep them, let alone show them off to other people.
Right. And he just pulls this out of nowhere. He wasn't president. So a lot of what he's talking about, it doesn't apply because he's a former president, and a former president doesn't have unilateral control over which documents of the U.S. government they hold on to. That's just not how that works. And also, he's not being charged under the Presidential Records Act. And so talking about that is so irrelevant because, number one, it's not like even if you were saying, was he complying with the Presidential Records Act? He wasn't. But you can set that aside because that's not even what he's being charged in relation to. And also, even if everything he said about his right to have the documents, this, that, and the other thing, how do you answer for the obstruction? How do you answer for telling your lawyers to lie about not having the documents anymore? How do you answer for all those things that are also crimes and against the law? And so his only defense being, I did the thing, but I can do the thing. Not going to work so well for him is my prediction. Here's another moment from this interview.
Do you believe that every CIA document that came to you as president was automatically yours to keep no matter what?
I'm not going to answer that question
Well, so
because
that's the dispute.
No, because I think it's clear in the document. The Presidential Records Act was a very complex thing that took a long time to do, having to do more with Richard Nixon because he kept everything. You know that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yep.
And they said, we don't want to have this anymore. So they did this, and these thugs and deranged people, they didn't even mention that. They never mentioned that. They never talked about that. They never said, gee, the Presidential Records Act. Do you know they don't even mention it? And everybody knows
that's right.
that I'm covered by that. So you can't have obstruction.
I've seen legal experts weigh in and say this isn't even going to be a valid argument he can bring forward. It's not even addressing the allegations against him. He's just making up a defense that isn't even attached to anything legitimate because, again, we don't even have to talk about the Presidential Records Act. But if we do, it explicitly talks about what you went through with the documents such as the ones at issue being property of the United States government. And for federal authorities to have requested time and time again and him not give them back and knowingly be trying to keep them out of the hands of federal authorities, it's just not something that you can say, well, Presidential Records Act and get out of. Absurd.
Well, so that clip might be one of my favorites of Trump because I'm just trying to imagine him teaching like a history class or a politics. Professor Trump, can you explain the Presidential Records Act? Listen, it
says
it was
you do
really,
whatever.
It was this really complex thing. It had to do with Richard Nixon. He kept everything, and it's like it was just that was one sentence fragment after another, which explained absolutely nothing. And you could almost feel Megyn Kelly just like nodding politely, eyes wide, like, please, let's get through this segment to the next question. Sure. I don't know what that had to do about anything. That was just a series of non sequiturs. What did that have to do with anything?
That's the story of Trump's life. We will end on this for this segment. Hey, you know how the argument, oh gosh, you know how the argument of Trump being a victim of political persecution doesn't make sense because there's no evidence of this being political persecution, and especially doesn't make sense because the evidence against him seems pretty damning and pretty good justifications for persecution. Well, no need to fear because someone has endorsed Trump's idea that this is political persecution, and you're not going to want to disagree with him. Take a look.
Yesterday, President Putin of Russia used this as an example of what a rotten country we are, that they go after their political opponent. And other countries are doing that too. Other countries that don't like us are doing that. They're saying it's a bigger story. They love it because it makes us look very bad. It makes us look very bad. And they're fake indictments. There's Fannie Willis and all of these people. These are all fake indictments.
I don't know if saying, hey, in this whole ordeal, I'm on the same side of history as Putin. I'm being defended by Putin, so that's why my argument's legitimate, is necessarily the most compelling.
No, yeah, I'm just like, man, you are scraping at the bottom of the barrel at this point. Like, Osama bin Laden's obviously not answering the phone call for an endorsement. Hannibal Lecter, Darth Vader. I'm trying to think like Vladimir Putin, the world's equivalent, the real life equivalent of a supervillain, with the possible exception of Kim Jong-un. Like, you know what's interesting, Luke? Once upon a time, imagine a counterfactual. Let's imagine George W. Bush or Mitt Romney or whoever, a previous leader of the Republican Party, ever saying something to the effect of, well, hey, Putin's got my back. You remember when that would have been immediately disqualifying?
Oh, yeah. And don't you love that he went, and other countries are saying it as well, but didn't list them? It was just Putin. Putin and everyone else who you would want to be endorsing me. Like you said, Darth Vader also said that I'm being politically persecuted. And it's coming. Yeah, Putin has a great place to speak from with his record on political persecutions. He knows if something's unjust or not. All the people who have mysteriously been killed. Like, he is the one who persecutes in the most vicious fashion. So he's going to know if the United States is messing up on Donald Trump. And one thing he said, by the way, is our enemies love this. Something to the effect of it's embarrassing us and humiliating us on the national stage. Not the prosecutions, Donald. What you did, that humiliated us. It would be even more humiliating if you weren't held accountable for the things that you did. The countries that we actually want to see leaders respect us from, those leaders were horrified by Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election, potentially unlawfully, and just keep himself the president, do something that a dictator or a wannabe dictator does. That would have been and was humiliating. Accountability is not the humiliating part. Thank you so much for watching. For the outro on this video, I want to plug Jesiah's channel. Hit them with it, Jesiah.
Hey, everybody. I appreciate you watching. You can find me at youtube.com/@ponderingpolitics. One word, pondering politics. If you like progressive commentary that focuses on coalition building with other elements of the left and calling the Republican Party out for what it's become, I hope you'll view my channel. Give me a like and subscribe and some feedback. Again, youtube.com/@ponderingpolitics. Thanks again.